Hello, and welcome to Sparks of Love.
Part 2. This is a continuation of the story. The link to the first part is in the description of this video. Enjoy watching. I laughed as she took my hand and guided me to the checkout lane. She was watching me, her eyes alive, as she drove the cart right into a corner display, causing a tower of cereal boxes to come tumbling down. Not just one or two, but the whole damn rack. I watched the life drain from Rebecca's face and her confidence fly away. I thought it would be fleeting, but it lingered past a second, and I saw lines begin to form around her eyes. Her body jerked when the rack hit the ground. People turned, and Rebecca began to recede into herself. It physically hurt to watch those few seconds. My muscles strained, and my throat thickened. I could not let it continue. I pulled Rebecca into my arms. She didn't struggle as my lips found hers. My intent was to be there with her and let her forget. It only took a moment as the grocery store faded away. Her hands found me and pulled me closer. I drifted with her, her soft lips embracing mine through a world of our own making. She returned to me stronger and more alive. "Excuse me, sir," a man in a white smock said to get my attention. I separated slowly from Rebecca. Her eyes were sparkling, and my heart leapt to see it. I looked at the man, a grin glued on my face. "Sorry, I was distracted," I said. "The cart kind of got away from me." The man looked between Rebecca and me and smiled. Rebecca's arm wrapped around my waist, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. She felt so comfortable there. "No problem, sir," the man said, on the verge of a chuckle. "If you pull the cart back, we'll get this cleaned up." I pulled the cart back as the man gave me another look. It was the lucky son of a witch look. Damn right, I thought. The house smelled delicious. There was an exquisite aroma of slow-cooked meat hanging in the air. My mouth had been watering, and Rebecca wasn't letting me near my own kitchen. It was strange that I was letting her do it. I actually liked the idea that she had claimed a domain and declared herself dictator. I enjoyed the confident Rebecca. "That smells wonderful," I complimented as I sat on the other side of the counter. "You would make a good chef." "That's my dream," Rebecca admitted. "I always end up waitressing in the end." It wasn't depressing sounding, she was just stating a fact. "Start your own restaurant," I continued as Rebecca placed the lettuce she was tearing into a big bowl. "Kind of need money for that," Rebecca said. $500,000 just to build it and half that again to keep it going the first year." She had put some thought into it. I don't even think I could help her borrow that kind of money. Maybe before the divorce, but now I was lucky to get a good rate on a car loan. The doorbell rang and ended the discussion. Kathy was much older than Rebecca, and I couldn't see much family resemblance. Kathy's expression was severe when I greeted her. I felt I was being analyzed, and it was a foregone conclusion I would be found wanting. Her face brightened when Rebecca came out of the kitchen to welcome her. There was something about Kathy I didn't like. I had expected to be vetted by her and knew that wasn't it. Something was off. Her sudden change when Rebecca appeared didn't feel genuine. Their age difference was disturbing, and I disliked the way Rebecca seemed to defer to her with her posture and altered mannerisms. It was not a good start, so I decided to let my reservations go and begin anew. "I'm glad you're here," I said, smiling. "Rebecca's cooking has been teasing my nose for over an hour." I wasn't sure I could hold out much longer. "She cooks for you?" Kathy questioned in a less than friendly manner. Rebecca didn't seem to notice the tone. I, on the other hand, did. "It's kind of tough to stop her," I responded in a neutral tone. I was done with being pleasant. It took me less than a minute to decide this was going to be a long dinner. I reminded myself not to be unpleasant. The last thing I wanted was to come between Rebecca and Kathy. I sensed Kathy didn't have the same fears regarding me. Rebecca pulled the roast out of the oven, and I no longer cared what Kathy thought of me. It was a wonderful-looking piece of meat. I don't think I really appreciated my oven enough. Rebecca lifted it out of the Dutch oven. It had been kept warm in with a large fork and knife. I could see the pride in her eyes as she handed the platter to me to carve. The rub she had put on the meat increased the savory smell. I could almost taste it with my nose. I began to cut into the meat and suddenly felt like my father at Thanksgiving. The whole situation felt domesticated. I looked up at Rebecca's smiling face, my barbecue apron around her waist, and the ultra-clean kitchen. Memories of her cleaning the bathroom and grocery shopping had snuck up on me 3 days after my divorce was finalized, and I was feeling way too comfortable with another woman in my house. Rebecca saw something in my face. I could see worry building. So, I shook off my thoughts and added a smile for her. Kathy seemed to miss it all. I cut into the meat and found perfection. It had a warm pink center, and the juices flowed. I had to give Rebecca credit. She could cook. I left the A1 in the fridge. "So, what do you do for a living?" Kathy asked me as dinner progressed. I was chewing when she spoke. The meat was almost melting in my mouth. Maybe the domestic thing wasn't so bad. "I work for Bradford Insurance and Casualty," I answered once my mouth was free. "I work in the computer department." I usually don't go past that much. A fuller description bordered on boring. "How long have you worked there?" Kathy continued her interrogation. I guess being Rebecca's only family, it was her right. 10 years now, I replied as I stirred my salad around a bit, looking for more raspberries. The dressing Rebecca made went well with the raspberries and nuts, not a mix I would ever have thought of. "Do you aspire beyond insurance?" Kathy continued. Rebecca surprised me by scooping some more raspberries out of their container and into my bowl. "Mind reader," I said with a smile as I thanked Rebecca. "There's a career path there." "I'm vested and happy, so I see little reason to move on," I answered. "It must not pay well," Kathy said with no reservations as she looked around my small house. My first thought was, death by fork. I pulled back and decided the whole truth was necessary, lest she find out from a different source. "I went through a protracted divorce," I confessed. "It took a toll on my finances. Everything is stable now." "You were married?" Kathy asked with disdain while looking at Rebecca. I guess she suspected Rebecca to be shocked. Rebecca just smiled softly and nodded. "Yes, for 9 years," I replied, then quickly added, "We were separated for the last 4 years. It was finalized a few days ago." "My, you do move fast," Kathy said. She quickly filled her mouth with salad as if the comment was an inconsequential afterthought. "Stop it," Rebecca said forcibly, staring at her sister. I was glad it wasn't a spineless relationship. In fact, it made me feel better. I didn't like the idea of a helpless Rebecca. I smiled and decided to diffuse things before we sank into a series of jabs we would regret. "Kathy's just worried about you," I said nicely. I don't blame her. I just offended Rebecca's sister for questioning our relationship. Everything was moving at breakneck speed. I put some more roast in my mouth to give me time to think. I was letting things get defined by default. "That's a beautiful aquarium," Kathy said to change the subject. I think she realized she had dug a little deeper than necessary. She decided a little diplomacy was in order. It was nice to see her white flag go up. We spent the rest of the dinner discussing the care and feeding of saltwater fish. Kathy enjoyed watching me blunder about. It's strange how your opinion of someone can change when they take an interest in your favorite things. When we finished, Rebecca tried to start cleaning the dishes. I insisted she sit, she cooked, I would clean. Also, the idea of her cleaning again kind of ate at me. It was better to equalize things and hold on to some independence. Kathy surprised me by grabbing a towel and insisting on drying. Rebecca was pleased. "You're moving too fast," Kathy said quietly when Rebecca headed off to the bathroom. I knew she didn't mean the dishes. "Should you be talking with Rebecca about this?" I asked, handing her a clean bowl. She took it and began to dry. "I already tried," Kathy answered. "She's vulnerable. The fire and the accidents have damaged her confidence. I would be happier if she came back with me tonight." At least she was being honest. I thought for a moment as I washed a plate. Everything was moving quickly. I also knew the comfort was strangely frightening. I shook my head. "We do well together," I stated, handing her the clean plate. I chastised myself for fearing comfort. "After you're done banging her, she'll be crying at my door," Kathy said with cruelty. I wondered how long it would take to drown someone in a kitchen sink. I stopped washing and took a deep breath. "I'm going to ignore that," I said stiffly. I continued washing the plate I had been working on. "No," I had reconsidered. "You need to trust Rebecca. If my intentions were as slimy as you think, you wouldn't even be here." Kathy took a step back as I shoved the clean plate at her. She took it gingerly. I guess I had some evil in my eyes. "Sorry," Kathy stated firmly, dropping the towel on the counter and placing the wet dish next to it. I wasn't sure what she was sorry about. Rebecca walked back into the kitchen, which quickly ended the conversation. "Let's take a walk," Kathy said with a forced smile at Rebecca. Rebecca looked at me, and I nodded that it was all right. The two headed out the front door, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Kathy was not my favorite person. I finished the dishes and sat on the couch, waiting for the ladies to return. I wasn't pleased with the evening so far. I had expected to get grilled but not judged harshly. I poured a glass of wine and put on some music. I closed my eyes and leaned back, trying to let the stress dissipate. The first thing I felt were soft, gentle lips, waking me from a brief nap. I opened my eyes to see Rebecca smiling down at me, sitting comfortably with her knees on either side of my thighs. "Where's your sister?" I asked as my memory returned. "I sent her home," Rebecca replied. "She was worried you might hurt me." Her expression grew more serious. "You wouldn't do that, would you?" "Of course not," I reassured her. Rebecca leaned in and kissed me again, her touch full of warmth. I gently caressed her back, drawing her closer as our connection deepened. She kissed my cheek softly and paused near my ear. "I just want to be close to you," Rebecca whispered. "I didn't help you out for anything in return," I said, feeling a bit awkward but needing to clarify my intentions. I felt her smile against my cheek. "And I'm not here for any reason other than wanting to be with you," Rebecca whispered back. Her words were filled with sincerity, and I could feel the mutual desire between us. We kissed again, this time with a shared understanding. She laughed lightly as she helped me with her shirt, her eyes meeting mine with a playful smile. "My God, you are beautiful," I said truthfully. Rebecca stopped trying to step out of her shoes for a second and looked at me. All her curves were exactly where I thought they should be. Her smile grew, and she awkwardly began stepping on her heels again to dislodge her shoes. We made wild love. "That was kind of amazing," I whispered into Rebecca's ear. She was dead weight in my arms as she recovered, still laughing. I reached up and massaged her neck softly as I smiled at whatever she found humorous. "What is so funny?" I asked. "My sister," Rebecca said as she sat up. She kissed me deeply. She said we weren't compatible, that it would be boring. It certainly wasn't boring, I added. She cradled my face with her hands and kissed me again. She put her forehead against mine and stared into my eyes. "I don't think your sister likes me," I said with humor. Rebecca smiled, moving her hips up and down, teasing me. "Ignore her." "I am," she said. "She just wants me to move back in with her." The thought of Rebecca possibly leaving struck me harder than I expected. I didn't have the right, but at that moment, I was in my personal heaven and didn't want it to stop. "I don't want you to leave," I stated. It sounded more like a plea than the request I intended. "So you like using me for sex?" Rebecca smiled. "I think you used me," I laughed. My mind flirted with the desires I fully intended to deploy if she decided to stay. "You do like using me for sex," Rebecca stated, her eyes sparkling. "Yes," I admitted. "Very much." Rebecca hugged me close, like she intended to never let me go. I let my fears go as she held me. I decided to ignore self-imposed waiting rules. I liked her more than I should. I truly didn't want her to leave. I had made love to a woman with the lights on twice. I had done that only once with Linda. With Rebecca, it seemed natural. Rebecca was so unashamed about her body, nature was just nature around her. She held no concerns about sharing herself with me. I was more than satisfied just to have her near me. I want you to stay here with me, I said firmly. Ask me tomorrow, Rebecca responded, smiling. When I have clothes on. I chuckled at her sensibility. My request will stand. I'll gladly ask again tomorrow and the next day if necessary, I smiled. I already knew I wanted her to stay, naked or not. It's too fast, Rebecca stammered. It wasn't fear, it was the same confusion I felt. It was entirely too fast, entirely too strong, and it was all I desired. I sliced some of the leftover roast into small pieces. I had woken up before Rebecca and had a desire to make her breakfast. Making omelets was the one cooking skill I possessed. I had no idea if a steak and egg omelet would excite her taste buds, but it had mine watering. I had the pan warming on the stove at 3 on the dial. Cooking omelets was a temperature game. If you got it right, you had firm yellow eggs encasing the filling. If you got it wrong, the eggs turned brown or were runny. Neither was very appetizing. Good morning, Rebecca said sweetly. She had snuck up on me. I looked up at an angel in one of my t-shirts. Her hair was going every which way but where it was supposed to go. My heart leapt at the sight. No sunrise could compare to her. I dropped the knife on the cutting board. I want you to stay here with me, I repeated my request from last night. Rebecca wasn't fully dressed, but I desperately didn't want to forget. Okay, Rebecca replied with a smile. That was settled, so my apprehension died away. Good morning, I said, pointing to a stool. Coffee, please, Rebecca answered as she sat down. I'm making steak and cheese omelets, I added as I moved to the coffee pot. Sounds delicious, Rebecca said. I love you, I said, somewhat stupidly, as I poured her a cup of coffee. The silence frightened me for a second, and I turned to find her only an arm's length away. Her lips answered me, words were no longer necessary. The world made total sense. Rebecca and her sister had a rather heated phone conversation after lunch. I left Rebecca to argue with Kathy, not wanting to get in the middle of two sisters. I already picked the winter anyway. Instead, I went back to fixing the hole. I put a layer of mud over the mesh tape on the drywall. I was rather impressed with my work. I went into the garage and duplicated my efforts on the other side of the wall. I had to shift some insulation around to try to preserve the thermal barrier. Other than that, it worked out as well as the inside had. Very nice, Rebecca commented as I finished the mudding in the garage. She was still wearing only the t-shirt she had put on this morning. Kathy still upset? I asked, knowing the answer. I was rather surprised at how adamant her sister had become. It seemed so out of character for a sister to carry it so far. She'll live, Rebecca said. She played the mother card, and it failed, so she's pouting. The mother card? I asked. You know how disappointed my mother would be if she were alive today? That type of bull, Rebecca said offhandedly. Was your mother like that? I don't know, Rebecca responded softly. She died giving birth to me. I heard a little sadness in her voice. Kathy was trying to be Rebecca's mother and doing a lousy job of it, but I suddenly had some sympathy for her. Kathy raised you? I asked, putting down my tools and moving toward her. I realized I knew so little about Rebecca's life. Yes, Rebecca answered, pulling me into a loose embrace. She was already in her 20s when Mom died. I think I was an accident. She chuckled. I kind of still am. The sadness was for never knowing her mother. I always wondered if I would have been different if she hadn't died. Then you wouldn't have rear-ended me, I said, smiling. Rebecca playfully squeezed my hips. You've got a nice rear end, she joked, her mood light and teasing. Feeling a sudden urge to make her laugh, I quickly put away the drywall mud and took her hand. She followed me eagerly, her smile showing that she was on the same page. We went into the bedroom, and I gently lifted her t-shirt over her head, revealing a pair of baby blue panties. She noticed where my eyes went and turned with a playful grin. "What do you think of my blue panties?" she teased, giving a little wiggle. "I remember you checking me out that first night," I laughed as I helped her out of the rest of her clothes. With a gentle but playful push, I guided her onto the bed, sharing a moment that left us both smiling and content. "I have fears," Rebecca said, honesty in her eyes. "I'm scared I will hurt you one day. I don't think I could handle you hating me." I was saddened that she still thought herself cursed. I wished I could just reach into her and yank that idea out of her. "I could never hate you," I said softly. Linda flashed in my mind. I wondered if I felt something similar with her when we first met. I didn't want it to be a lie. "It won't be on purpose," Rebecca continued. "I want you to know I would never hurt you on purpose." She was admitting defeat before the battle was even envisioned. I pulled her lips to mine and tried to love the thoughts from her mind. "For whatever may happen," I whispered in her ear, "I forgive you." I felt her smile form on my cheek. Her hand began stroking me, and her lips nibbled on my neck. I sucked in my breath, not expecting the passion to continue. "You're a fool, Damon Richardson," Rebecca breathed. "My lovely, lovely fool." The feeling climbed quickly, her breathing so close to my ear, her soft hand, and the love I felt. "I love you," she whispered. She was mine. Joy and passion exploded in me. What a lovely mess it was. My phone rang during dinner. I was going to take Rebecca out, but she preferred to cook. She had found some fresh halibut at the store and masterfully created a peach and pepper salsa for it. I thought it sounded ghastly, but I tried it out of love. It was to die for. Rebecca was born to tantalize taste buds. I looked at my phone and saw which Barrow as the caller ID. I quickly answered, kicking myself for not updating Linda's contact info. "You didn't call me back," Linda started, "not even a hello." "Nope," I answered. I knew the one-word response would piss her off, but I didn't know why that pleased me. I promised myself I wouldn't hate her anymore. "You with someone?" Linda continued. I smiled at my gorgeous chef. "Yes," I responded, like an a-hole. Rebecca smiled back at me. "The same one who screwed with me before?" Linda asked more softly this time. "Yes," I said, then added, "It was just a joke." "Sorry." "Are you happy?" Linda asked. It sounded contrite and very unlike her. "What's wrong, Linda?" I asked in response. "You can't live with someone for years and not know when something is off," Linda said. Rebecca's eyes widened when I mentioned Linda's name. "I feel like Linda admitted," I said. I had so much anger and now, well, I regret most of it. I wondered what parts she didn't regret. "I want to make sure you aren't wallowing in it too." She would never come out and ask, it just wasn't her way. "I forgive you, Linda," I said, "and I hope you feel the same." I watched Rebecca shift to a puppy dog expression, which almost made me laugh. It would have been very bad timing. "I do," Linda said excitedly. "And Damon?" "Yes?" I replied. "Tell her she's a lucky girl," Linda said pleasantly, then hung up. After 4 years of hate, Linda had found her humanity again. She wanted to make sure I didn't hate her. It felt good to let her off the hook. It was a bonus that there wasn't a spark of hate running around the world with my name on it. At least we were able to split that 50-50ths. "Linda want you back?" Rebecca asked, smiling. "That ship sailed over 4 years ago," I said. She just wanted to make sure I didn't hate her. I think she was feeling guilty. "You don't still have feelings for her?" Rebecca queried. She was testing me carefully. I rolled through my recent call lists on my phone and showed it to her. She covered her mouth and laughed. I guess which Barrow had its uses. "Don't get jealous." "I'm changing it back to Linda as a gesture of peace only," Rebecca said. She laughed and nodded. I started the correction. "I always hated the little digital keyboard. It made simple things like a name change a chore." If you can put up with my sister, Rebecca compromised, I'll not hold Linda against you. Maybe we should make peace with Kathy too, I offered. I completed the name change and put my phone away. She needs a few more weeks, Rebecca said stubbornly. She's convinced Tammy that you're no good for me. Tammy called you while you were in the bathroom, Rebecca replied. They both think I'm your sex toy. I smiled and bit my lip. I was about to say how right they were, but thought Rebecca might take it the wrong way. Male humor didn't always translate well across gender boundaries. She said she was good friends with your mother. I fed Rebecca, trying to find out more about her life. I didn't want to force direct questions. Rebecca didn't seem fully comfortable with her past. I certainly didn't want my curiosity to ruin things. That's what I'm told, Rebecca continued. She always seems to be there when Kathy and I need her. Kathy won't admit it, but I think Tammy helped us financially for many years. What about your dad? I asked, then kicked myself for the direct question. My curiosity moved faster than my compassion. Luckily, Rebecca didn't seem to mind. I don't think my mother knew, Rebecca said. I think she was a player. Rebecca didn't seem to feel any shame about it. I had some pictures before the fire. Other than that, I know practically nothing about my history, no grandparents, aunts, or uncles. Just Kathy. Then we'll give her some time and invite her out to dinner, neutral ground, I strategized. Rebecca smiled and held out her hand across the counter. I took it in mine. I'm so glad I rear-ended you, Rebecca admitted. I laughed. The 4-day weekend went by too quickly. We were able to sand and paint the patched wall. I could hardly tell there had ever been a hole in it. Rebecca was able to get the stains out of the couch cushions and also rearranged the entire kitchen. I was made aware of how I had screwed up in choosing the silverware drawer. To me, it made no difference at all, other than it made her happy to move it. I was happy with that. Work seemed fresh that morning. I guess that went with my new outlook on life. I knew what was waiting for me when I got home. I was in a meeting I had promised to attend. Susan was there, as promised. It was a reevaluation of a website that our department had developed. The users weren't happy with the speed, so everyone from hardware, networking, and programming was there. We were halfway through with Bob's hardware report when the receptionist, Mary, came in with a bouquet of a dozen roses in a heart-shaped vase. I figured it was someone's birthday or anniversary. Mary passed the ladies and went straight to me. "What's this for?" I asked. "It's for you," Mary smiled with a hint of humor. I looked at the flowers, then back at Mary's flushed face. "You brought them in here? Why not leave them on my desk?" Mary shook her head, her smile growing larger. She pointed to the note card sticking out from between the blooms. I took it off its plastic clip and read, "To my sex toy, from your sex toy. I love you. Broken garage door. My butt." Mary laughed. Susan, who had been reading over my shoulder, tried to stifle her laughter but failed. I quickly stuffed the note in my pocket, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "Who is she?" Susan asked. I ignored her question. I have to get these into water," I lied as I rose. "Can we break for 5? "You have to tell us who she is," Susan laughed as I hurried out. Mary followed me to my desk. "You like her?" Mary inquired. I had never really discussed more than the weather with Mary before, and now she was acting like my trusted friend. I turned, more embarrassed than I should be. "Yes," I sighed. I surrendered to the obvious. Mary chuckled. "She's claiming her turf. That's a same-day florist card. Send 2 dozen back." "I'm sure I look confused," I said, letting everyone know she has dibs. "There are rules, you know. Send twice as many back." Mary turned and almost walked into Susan. "Sex toy?" Susan asked quietly with a smile I didn't deserve. Mary had a private chuckle with Susan. "That's one hell of a no trespassing sign," Susan continued as she leaned over and smelled one of the roses. "What's she like?" Both were looking at me intently. Suddenly, my sex life was everyone's business. The sex toy is a private joke, I said quietly. Talking over cubicles wasn't exactly private. So you haven't, Mary started. I must have turned 50 shades of red thinking about Rebecca naked. They both started a new round of laughter. Flowers? She had to send me flowers? I said louder than I intended. It's not like that. I love her, I added, my mouth quicker than my brain. Neither Mary nor Susan seemed shocked, both still smiling. She's a lucky girl, Susan said. 24, Mary reminded me as they both walked off giggling. I plopped into my seat, defeated, picked up the phone, and ordered 24 roses. Lunch was strange. I usually just headed out to a sandwich place and brought it back to my desk. Sometimes I would mix it up and have a burger. This time, as I was walking back to my cubicle, I was waylaid by Susan. She insisted I join her in the break room. I couldn't comfortably decline, though I really wanted to. Mary and a compliance officer named Trudy were sitting there, seemingly waiting for me. I had spoken with Trudy before when I designed some queries looking for anomalies in our databases. I was going to be interrogated by polite busybodies. I sighed as I sat down. What's her name and how did you meet her? Mary started. I had 6 eyes on me waiting for my answer. I slowly unwrapped my sandwich to give me time, then I gave in and spilled the whole story. It sounded so asinine as it came out of my mouth. They all looked on intently as I described the events as they unfolded. They had me clarify some issues before I went on. I ended at the point where the flowers came in. She rear-ended you, tried to blackmail you, lost your favorite jeans, you bailed her out of jail, and she broke your phone and your garage door. Her family hates you, and you love her? Susan asked incredulously as she summarized. Yes, I said, then smiled at the stupidity of it all. Completely adorable, Trudy said. It's insane, Mary contradicted. You've only known her 5 days. She's homeless and unemployed. I nodded. There was no arguing with the truth. Are you sure you aren't rebounding from your divorce? Susan asked. I looked at all 3 of them. Trudy was smiling, the other 2 looked concerned. I liked Trudy's smile. My marriage was over 4 years ago, I said, looking at Trudy. I have no idea why I connected with Rebecca, but I have. I couldn't stop now if I wanted to. It's beautiful, Trudy added, looking between Mary and Susan. She's rearranged the kitchen, Mary agreed. Well, she is in it for the long haul, Susan said. I was beginning to get lost. Susan saw it. It's her kitchen now, she said, smiling. The flowers, the kitchen, it all means the same thing. I obviously missed the book on female mating behavior. If you find your sock drawer moved, then you better get a ring, Susan laughed. It didn't bother me. It should have, but I saw no downside to Rebecca marking her territory. In my mind, I had already claimed her. I smiled at the thought. See? Trudy said, nodding at me. You haven't even scared him off. In fact, they had solidified my thinking. I took a bite of my ignored chicken salad sandwich. All 3 of the women were watching me closely as I chewed. I swallowed hard before I had fully chewed. Why are you so interested? I asked. I didn't think I was worthy of more than a hello before the flowers. The ladies looked at each other and grinned. Sex toy, Mary chuckled. Rebecca sounds like she's having more fun than we are, Susan said. My cheeks got warm. I took another bite of my sandwich and tried to look away. I think they enjoyed my embarrassment. Does everyone have to know about that? I asked desperately. All 3 smiled and nodded. I guessed I was what passed for entertainment at an insurance company. I love my flowers, Rebecca said as she enveloped me in her arms when I walked in the door. I could smell something delicious cooking in her kitchen. I made a mental note to check my sock drawer. She then kissed me as if I had been gone for a month. My flowers are wonderful as well, I said, enjoying Rebecca in my arms. I liked the idea of coming home to her. "This is for you," Rebecca said, handing me a check. It was from Tammy for $3,000. "What for?" I asked as I read the check for the second time. "For my bail," Rebecca answered, smiling. "Tammy dropped by for lunch and insisted you weren't here to refuse, so I accepted. But I'll get the money back when you go to court." I had already written off the service fee and didn't want to upset Rebecca by mentioning it. She likes to do things for me. "She's rich, so let her," Rebecca said. I wasn't sure if I would cash the check. I'm not much for gifts of that size or the feeling of being in someone's debt. Rebecca seemed to take it in stride. "Does she always do things like this?" I asked, then smiled to ease Rebecca's mind. "My whole life," Rebecca responded as she led me to the kitchen. "She likes your fish, by the way." I looked over to see Masa lying calmly on the bottom of the tank. Tammy and Kathy were a strange support system for Rebecca. I was hoping I might be a bit more stable or at least more predictable. "Dinner is almost ready," she said brightly. "Smells wonderful," I said, setting the check on the counter. "I'm experimenting," Rebecca said. "You're my guinea pig." "Pork chops stuffed with pesto." She pulled 2 sizzling chops out of the oven. It really sounded gross, but it smelled amazing. I knew I was going to eat it even if it tasted horrid. I prepped my taste buds and went to grab a strong wine just in case. "Why didn't you ask Tammy to stay for dinner?" I asked as I fished in the wrong drawer for a corkscrew. Rebecca pointed at the drawer next to it. Strange how we didn't need words. Sure enough, the corkscrew was exactly where she put it. "I did," Rebecca responded as she transferred the chops to plates. She said she was busy. Rebecca gave me a sly smile. I think she was meeting her lover. I had to smile at that. A lover? I would have thought she was married. "Her lover is," Rebecca laughed. She placed some green beans and mashed potatoes onto the plates. The potatoes looked like they had some kind of cheese mixed in. "I never pictured her that way," I said honestly. "I was thinking back to my quick meeting with Tammy. She seemed too proper to be fooling around with a married man. Maybe it was just the rich decor in her apartment that made me feel that way." "She's been his mistress for years," Rebecca continued. "I think that's where her money comes from. God knows she doesn't work." Rebecca put a plate in front of me, and I traded her for a full glass of wine. I looked at my pork chop and the somewhat ugly-looking greenish, nutty substance leaking out of it. I won't even get into what it reminded me of. I was losing confidence in my ability to fake enjoyment. I wondered if Rebecca would be insulted if I doused it in A1. Rebecca confidently cut into her chop, swirled the piece of meat in the pesto, and took it in her mouth. I was patiently waiting to see if she'd grimace. Much better than it looks," she said as she went for another piece. I wasn't sure if she was trying to fool me. I hesitantly picked up my fork and chickened out. I went for the potatoes and happily enjoyed their cheesiness. The green beans had some kind of crunchy, seasoned stuff mixed in that was also very tasty. At least I wouldn't starve. Rebecca smiled at me. "Are you afraid of it?" she said sweetly. I knew what she meant. "What?" I feigned ignorance. I didn't like my cowardice much at that point. Rebecca just tilted her head and smiled. "I cave first," I said. "It's just how it looks. I'm working my way up to it." She rose and walked over to me, still smiling, though she had a sneaky look in her eyes. "I'll get to it," I said, trying to defend myself. I really wasn't relishing her feeding me like a child. She stuck her finger into my pesto stuffing, scraped it off onto her tongue, and kissed me deeply. I instantly became a great fan of pesto. The pork was the perfect platform for the pesto to shine. It was a shame Rebecca had only made 2, though I was allowed to eat half of hers. I made her promise to make it again. "I'm going to be a fat guinea pig at this rate," I said as we began washing the dishes. "I'm working on your exercise plan," Rebecca said with a serious face. I looked over as I handed her a plate to dry. I didn't see any humor in her eyes. I don't really go for the workout thing, I said. I figured she might as well know now. I'll do some walking or biking, but no schedule. I only had one life to live, and I wouldn't be spending it sweating in a gym. Shame, Rebecca said. I was enjoying our naked workouts. There was that smile. It was a few hours later before we returned to finish the dishes. My aerobic heart rate had been raised sufficiently. Carl met me for lunch the next day at a bar and grill near his office. I usually didn't drink during the workday, but with Carl, you make exceptions. I always got a kick out of seeing him in a suit. It was so counter to his personality that it was almost humorous. By the time I got to the grill, he was on his second beer. Damon! Carl called loudly as I neared the table. I'm glad you decided to wear pants today. Damn, the man had no inside voice. Half the restaurant was looking over at us, grinning. Carl, I said a little more quietly, I forgot to thank you for picking me up that night. Next time I'll call someone else. Carl laughed, which made me forget my embarrassment. We ordered some sandwiches and a couple of beers. So she's living with you? He asked. Yep. We kind of hit it off. You mean she hit you? Carl said, shaking his head and grinning. So much for bachelorhood. You lasted, what, 24 hours? It was a really long day, I added. Our beers arrived, and Carl toasted to my stupidity and then to a lucky girl named Rebecca. That's why I liked Carl. He joked about my idiot moves but never judged them. He was simply there for me. She's got a strange family, I said as we relaxed. A sister who doesn't like much and a really rich friend who seems to care too much. I showed Carl the check. That's from her friend to offset the bail money. You going to cash it? Carl asked. I always wanted a rich friend myself, he said. Rebecca says I would insult Tammy if I don't, so I guess I'll stop at the bank on the way back to work. I don't feel real good about it though. $3,000 is $3,000. Don't insult the lady. Introduce her to me, Carl said. That would be insulting, I joked. Carl laughed and then drank down half his beer. You love her? Carl asked as he set his mug down. Yes, and I don't know why. Everything says run, but I am glued willingly in place. Sex will do that, Carl claimed. I almost sent beer into my nose trying not to laugh. I knew he waited until the beer was in my mouth before he spoke. Sex and good cooking, I added, once I had wiped the beer drool off my chin. Sexy chef with a rich friend, Carl summarized. I'm thinking you hit the mother lode. It's not just the sex, I said. I want to be near her. I don't want her anywhere else but in my house. Go with it, Carl encouraged. You deserve to be happy, and I need more happy friends. I really wished I didn't have to go back to work that afternoon. If I could, I would wallow in beer with Carl. I owe you one, you know. Without you, I would never have survived the divorce. Anytime, my friend, Carl said and waved the waitress over for another round of drinks. I found a job, Rebecca announced as I walked in the door. I felt her joy and gave her a congratulatory kiss, then another. She was wearing my Stay Puft Marshmallow Man t-shirt and little else from what I could feel. Where? I asked. Waitressing, but it's a job, Rebecca continued. It's on the bus route and not too far away. She held up my Ghostbusters boxers. Change. I have an exciting night planned, she said, her smile delicious. Only the boxers, she added as I headed off to the bedroom. I was liking where this was heading. Rebecca had the crock pot on the coffee table. Next to it was a plate with a chunk of sharp cheddar surrounded by crackers. There were 2 cans of beer and a couple of plates waiting. I found your Ghostbusters DVDs and figured we'd have a picnic in front of the TV, she said with a proud smile. I really liked where this night was heading. I thought you said the movie wasn't that good. It's all in who you watch it with, Rebecca countered. She pulled the lid off the crock pot, and I saw the oddest looking mini pigs in a blanket warming inside. She picked one out with her fingers and put it to my lips. The mini wiener was covered in a much darker breading than I had seen before. They looked almost overcooked. Rebecca smiled and pushed harder until my lips parted and I bit down. "Pretzel heaven," I said, with a mouthful of half-chewed pretzel wiener. The wieners were baked in a pretzel breading. The crock-pot suddenly looked too small. "These are delicious," I said, loving the smile it caused on Rebecca's face. I had to learn to trust her cooking. She violated every edible principle I had, but never ceased to make love to my taste buds. "Finger food tonight," Rebecca said, and flipped on the TV. Somehow, she had figured out the myriad of remote controls and fired up the stereo tuner and Blu-ray player. "Perfect," I said, smiling as I sat down on the couch. I had to shove a few folded towels off to the side. I gave Rebecca a quizzical look. "Don't want to ruin the couch," Rebecca said in a sultry voice. Now I was sure there wasn't anything under that t-shirt. "Absolutely perfect," I rephrased. We curled up on the couch and watched the movie, feeding each other, laughing, and not always paying attention to the screen. Rebecca had fun teasing me by flashing, rubbing, or simply being sexy. I had fun being teased. We were at the scene where the pencil neck was shutting off the containment grid. Rebecca obviously couldn't care less. She smiled at my rapt attention to the screen and let her head drop into my lap. The impending demise of New York City no longer held my interest. I was still smiling from Rebecca's movie night. It had been a few days ago, but it still kept me warm at work. I thought it deserved some original thought on my part. I spent some work time surfing until I found a gourmet cooking convention in Indianapolis for the coming weekend. Rebecca wasn't supposed to start her new job until Monday, so I booked a hotel room and purchased some tickets. I was anxious about my surprise. When I drove into the garage for the first time since Rebecca had moved in, there was no smell in the air, nothing cooking. She wasn't there to meet me at the door. The house was dark except for the blue glow of the fish tank. I called out, receiving silence in response. She hadn't told me she would be out. Not that we were married, but something didn't feel right. I flipped on the light and moved to the bedroom, thinking I had caught her napping. My head snapped to the right before I felt it. The whole left side of my face exploded in pain, and I lost my vision. My knees wobbled as I nearly dropped to the floor. A large form moved in front of me from the hall, and my stomach caved in response to a fist. I went down on all fours before my hands could come up. I tasted blood as I gasped for breath. A foot drove into my stomach, turning me over and driving bile into my mouth. 3 men, none of whom I recognized, stood before me. One was smiling, one spat on me, and the other had a knife at Rebecca's throat. "I got money," I spat out through the blood. "Don't hurt her." The smiling one stepped on my wrist, putting all his weight on it. Only the carpeting was saving the bones. "Listen," the man who had spat on me said. "Mr. Gordini doesn't appreciate you spending time with his woman." The statement was followed by a kick to my side. I felt my ribs give, and all I could do was grunt. "Maybe we should spend time with yours," the man continued. I heard Rebecca squeal in the distance. Anger filled me. I gave up on my wrist and rolled into the leg at the top. To my surprise, I freed my hand without breaking it. I rose slightly and twisted into the man's knee, bringing him down. I kneed him in the stomach and drooled blood on his clothes. I began to rise. It was my house, and they were threatening all that I loved. A knee caught my chin and drove my head back. That was followed by a fist that took my balance from me. I crumpled back to the floor, my head swimming in waves of tar. I tried desperately to rise again. My left eye was swollen shut, and blood was pouring from my mouth. 2 sets of arms pulled me to my feet. I tried to struggle, but my muscles weren't responding. I could hear Rebecca crying out, perhaps a mile away. Suddenly, I picked up speed. My right eye saw nothing but the blue of the fish tank. My head hit sideways, and water sloshed out of the top. I collapsed, feeling warm wetness run into my ear. One of the men said the damn thing didn't break. I tried to raise my head, but my neck wasn't responding to the command. "No, please don't do it," Rebecca screamed. I heard glass shatter, and a flood of salt water covered me. I looked up and saw the Smiler with one of the kitchen stools in his hands. He was laughing. "Go near Miss Simpson again, and you and yours are dead," the Smiler said, throwing the stool over the counter and into the kitchen, where I heard something break among the clatter. The name was familiar, but my foggy brain couldn't identify it. I tried to say, "Who the hell is Miss Simpson?" but only blood bubbled from my mouth. I began to choke on it, so I forced myself to roll onto my side to drain my throat. I saw a blurred image of Rebecca held by the third man. I reached out for her with no strength left. My arm collapsed on top of a flopping masa. I felt a deep stab in my arm. Damn, I thought clumsily, killed by my own fish. Raging fire burned into my arm, and a deep blackness swallowed me. I heard my name in a fog. I tried to open my eyes, but they wouldn't respond, nor would my hands when I tried to wipe my eyes. I tried to listen to fully wake my mind. She blames herself, they say. He will recover. She moves back. Only fragments I half recognized, like a radio that just won't fully grasp a frequency. My mind drifted. It's for the best. I'll watch him. I wasn't sure how time flowed as I retreated back to darkness, unable to fight any longer. "Good morning, Mr. Richardson," the voice was cheerful. I heard curtain rings being slid along their rail, and my eyelids brightened dramatically. I blinked slowly, my eyes feeling the light as pain. "The doctor will be in shortly. She hopes you will be awake." The voice moved closer. I made out an olive green shape, linear without the curves I expected attached to such a pleasant voice. I coughed as I tried to speak. My throat cleared what felt like a week of backup. My mouth was dry, but my eyes began working better. I looked up into a practiced smile, her blonde hair pulled tightly back away from her face. The eyes were intelligent and saw none of the confusion I felt. "Good morning," I gargled out. I sounded old and coughed again. "I'm Julie, morning shift," she said clearly, almost as if she expected me to be a little slow. "Do you know where you are?" My eyes glanced around the hospital room, a couple of blinking consoles, basic white sheets, and beige walls. A double window with curtains open let in way too much sunlight. My head began to pound. "Hospital," I answered, a little more coherently. I waved my hand toward the curtains. "Can we close those damn curtains?" The light seemed to be burrowing directly into my skull. "If you promise to stay awake," Julie said, moving to close the curtains without waiting for my agreement. "How long?" I asked. "For days," Julie smiled. "Rather, this will be your fourth." "Rebecca?" I asked, looking around the room, which was empty. A knife at her throat was the last thing I remembered. I tried to sit up, but my chest protested with pain and my head swirled. "Is Rebecca all right?" "I don't know who that is," Julie answered. "You were admitted alone." She pushed me gently back into the pillow. "You're not going anywhere, but we do have a phone." Guilt racked my body. Thoughts of Rebecca being handled by those men tormented me. I hated those thoughts. Police. I need the police. I pleaded. I tried to sit up again, but Julie had all the leverage, and a sharp pain in my chest fought against my strength. "The police will be back again this morning," Julie said, applying more pressure to my shoulders. 4 days. My God, she could be dead. I was worthless. I just let them have her. I reached up with both hands. My chest was tortured with a dagger-like pain on the right side. Ignoring it, I pushed Julie's arms off my shoulders. I sat up with an audible grunt. "Please, Mr. Richardson," Julie said, losing her confidence and taking a step back. "You have to remain still." My feet got caught in the sheets as I tried to swing them off the bed. More pain shot through me as I bent over to pull the sheets out of the way. Everything hurt as I maneuvered my legs off the side. Julie had her arms outstretched, trying to stop me. I stood, but the world began to flip around in sweeping circles. Nausea filled my belly, and I lost my balance. Julie grabbed me, pushing me back to sit on the bed. "Slower," "You have to go slower," Julie pleaded. I had no choice but to listen. My mind and body refused to follow my instructions. "I need the police now," I demanded as Julie helped me lie down. The pillow cradled my head softly, and the spinning room began to slow. I was too weak then, and now all worthless. Tears flooded my eyes, daggers piercing my chest as I sobbed. "They should have just killed me." "I'll call them," Julie sighed as I finally settled into the bed. "I couldn't stop them," I blubbered. "Relax, let the drugs wear off," she said, grabbing a cloth from next to the bed and beginning to wipe my face. "Everything will be clearer soon." I couldn't stand up, much less walk. "I need my phone," I said, looking at the white nightstand, expecting to see it charging. Julie moved to the drawer and pulled it open. She retrieved my phone and handed it to me. It was, of course, quite dead. "I need a charger," I said, lucidity appearing from the fog. A woman entered, wearing the same olive green smock the nurse was wearing, covered by a white lab coat. "You're awake," the woman observed. "I'm glad to see that." "Awake and anxious," the doctor said. He tried to get out of bed. "And how did that work out for you?" the doctor asked. I didn't like the humor in her tone. She wore brass-rimmed glasses and looked over the top of them, waiting for my response. "I need a damn charger," I replied, waving the phone. I had never memorized any numbers, much less Rebecca's. I needed my contact list. "Julie, see if you can find a charger that fits his phone," the doctor said. Julie looked back at me as she took my phone out the door. "There, first problem solved," the doctor continued. "Thank you." I shouted toward the door, suddenly remembering my manners. I doubted Julie could have heard it. "You're going to be disoriented for a day or so," the doctor said while glancing at her tablet. "I've taken you off painkillers. If the pain gets to be too much, let me know, and we'll talk about reinstating them." The pain kept me awake. I needed to stay awake. The doctor smiled, looking up from her tablet. "Sorry, I'm Dr. Betty White," she added. "Hello, I am Damon Richardson," I responded. "You're my first line of fish poisoning," Dr. White said. I had to consult a colleague in Florida to verify the treatment. Consultations mean money. This was going to cost. I shook the monetary thoughts from my head. Rebecca Morrison was with me when I was attacked. What happened to her? "There was a woman here when you first came in," Dr. White said as she moved toward the head of the bed. "I didn't get her name, though. The front desk should have it. She spent most of her time crying, though she was physically fine. If she isn't family, they wouldn't have let her stay. It must have been Rebecca. No one else would be crying for me." I was partially relieved. Dr. White took a small flashlight out of her pocket and told me to stare at a spot on the ceiling. She flicked the light to and from my eyes. "You've suffered a concussion as well as the effects of the teredo venom," the doctor continued. "I feared you might have cerebral edema, but we ruled that out. Just a concussion. I don't believe you will have any lasting effects. You may want to stay out of fights for a few months," she smiled, thinking her obvious statement was funny. "You have a broken rib and bruising along your abdomen. That's going to make it painful to move around for a while." She lifted my arm and showed me a large red splotch where Massa poked me. "I've been assured the discoloration is temporary." She examined it more closely, like I was a lab rat, then let my arm drop. "We would like to keep you here until we're assured you regain adequate mobility, or until you have a caretaker at home. So, nothing permanent." I stretched my back and felt the sharp pain in my chest again. "No," I said, "though it would be wise to take it slow and seek medical advice quickly if you sense a problem. There's always a chance of an internal injury we may have missed." Julie returned with a charger. "This is one of the nurses," Julie said while plugging it into the wall. "He gets off in 3 hours, so you'll have to give it up then." I felt some of my helplessness fading. I had my phone again. "Thank you," I said honestly. Julie smiled and attached my phone to the cord. The telltale beep of the power connection being made was absent. The phone would need a few minutes to start charging. "I'll get some food sent up," Julie said, smiling at my thanks. "I'm sure you're hungry." My brain sorted through the pain in my stomach and separated the bruising from the hunger pains. I realized I was famished. "Sorry about earlier," I offered. My rudeness bothered me now. "I wasn't sure how you put up with it." "Forget it," Julie said, obviously pleased I apologized. "Drugs have that effect. Detective Williams will be here in about 30 minutes. I nodded, feeling it in my chest. Even simple movements reminded me I was hurt. Julie held up a call button attached to a cord and set it on the nightstand next to the phone. "Push this if you need to use the bathroom. One of us will make sure you get there in one piece. Your dizziness will begin to fade today," Dr. White added. "Tomorrow it should be manageable, though it's not unusual for it to stick around for a few days. I'll check on you in the morning. Just try to relax as best you can." "Thanks, Doc," I said. She left me with Julie, who handed me the TV remote. I couldn't remember the last time I'd watched daytime TV. Julie left, promising to send breakfast. I put the TV remote off to the side and grabbed my phone. It was responding slowly to my commands to turn it on. I waited impatiently for it to boot. When it finally came up, I found Rebecca in my recent call list and initiated the call. I had expected to hear her voice but was directed to voicemail instead. I left a fairly coherent message, mentioning my worry and my love. I begged her to call back. I tried 3 more times before the detective arrived, my worry growing with each failed attempt. "What do you remember?" Detective Williams asked after our brief introductions. "Did you speak with Rebecca Morrison?" I asked anxiously. "Yes, the night of the assault," Williams replied. "She's the one who reported it. She was okay." Of course, I continued my line of questioning, distraught. "But unharmed?" Relief washed through me at the detective's words. I hadn't realized how much tension I was holding in my shoulders. She was convinced it was all her fault, though she couldn't tell me why. I got the feeling she thinks trouble follows her around. I felt the tension return. I wasn't there for her. She was blaming herself with no one to hold her. "Do you know where she is?" I rambled. "I'm trying to call her." "I'm sorry, but no," Williams said sadly. I assumed he sensed my anxiousness. "I have a phone number and an address for her sister." He went a little pale, realizing he might have said too much. My mind reeled. She wouldn't be home when I got there. Maybe she just didn't want to stay there alone. "I wish she would call me," I said. She had to be scared. "Can you tell me what happened?" Williams continued, trying to get back to his job. I dumped everything I knew, which wasn't much. My descriptions of the attackers eliminated about 80% of the Earth's population, leaving only about 1 billion people to sift through. The mention of the name Gordini sparked some recognition in his eyes, though he let me continue uninterrupted as he took notes. I almost mentioned the name Simpson when it clicked. It was on the check I cashed from Tammy. It was her last name. I didn't care about her, but I definitely didn't want to burn any bridges until I had Rebecca in my arms again. Rebecca knew, no wonder she thought it was her fault. Maybe it was. I didn't care. Life without her would have no color. I stashed the name away and kept it from the detective. "That's similar to Rebecca's account," the detective said. "She must not have heard Gordini." He said it with incredulity. I ignored the tone. "Do you know Tony Gordini?" he asked. "I don't know any Gordini," I answered honestly. "If I showed you some pictures, do you think you would recognize your assailant?" Williams asked. "I might," I replied. "Who's Tony Gordini?" He put his notebook away and sighed in my general direction. "Honestly," Williams said quietly, "someone you don't want to recognize. You certainly don't want to date his girl." He chuckled a bit. "Or his wife." I didn't see anything funny. "I don't even know his girl," I said with irritation. "They were in my house. I don't give a damn who he is." The detective smiled, then disappeared. He reached into his pocket, withdrew a card, and handed it to me. "Here's my number," Williams said. "Call me when you're out of here, and we'll go over the pictures." He didn't seem like he really wanted to continue the investigation. If we can prosecute them, they're looking at a year for home invasion and assault and battery. A year didn't seem long enough. He emphasized the if, his whole tone trying to discourage me. "You aren't filling me with confidence," I said, my irritation now fully undisguised. "They have good lawyers," Williams said. "If I'm letting this go..." I almost yelled, "Yeah, okay." Williams said sadly, "I guess you won't. You have my card. Call me when you're ready." He turned to leave, but suddenly turned back. "Do yourself a favor. Look up Gordini before you come by." He left quickly after that. I called Carl. "You sure about this?" Carl asked as he pushed the wheelchair down the hall that evening. He thought I should spend another night. He had been shocked by the whole situation at first and wanted to gather some friends and go find the a-holes. After I mentioned Gordini, he mellowed quickly. I didn't need the internet. Carl was familiar with the myth of Gordini, the crime lord who ran the city, or at least its underbelly. Tammy was likely his mistress, that much I had put together. Why he thought it was necessary to keep me away, I had no idea. I didn't really care about Tammy except that she might be able to point me to Rebecca. Rebecca wasn't returning my hourly calls. "Just get me out of here," I answered quickly. Carl was quite clear that I looked like I needed to spend another night, and reiterated his desire that I stay. The hospital staff wasn't overly happy and thought I should clear it with Dr. White. I insisted, and they were forced to grant my demands. I conceded to using a wheelchair to end the argument. "This girl isn't good for you," Carl said, shaking his head. "I love her." "I hope you don't love her to death," Carl chuckled. I laughed. It hurt. I exited the wheelchair as soon as we hit the parking lot. I was walking a little funny, trying to use my legs without over-twisting my torso. Climbing into the car was painful, but I could manage. At least the dizziness had abated. "Tammy will know where she is," I said as Carl started the car. He rolled his eyes. "I'm not taking you to see the Godfather's girlfriend," Carl stated. I shook my head. "Nope, I'm going alone. Tammy won't answer my calls. I'm not letting you go alone." "Look, I don't know what's going on, but showing up with backup seems stupid," I said, and looked over as Carl backed out of the spot. "It's not like either of us could stop these guys. I'm just hoping I can reason with them if it comes to that. I don't think you can take another beating. Who am I going to drink with if you're dead? If they wanted me dead, I'd be. I'm thinking it won't come to that. Come on, even the cop tried to warn you off." "I love her," I said again. It kind of explained it all. "Okay," Carl conceded, "but I better get a bachelor party out of this." I smiled. "Strippers. Lots of strippers." I laughed. It hurt. My house was dark when I arrived. There was a strong scent of chemical cleaner in the air. I flipped on the lights. My broken fish tank sat on its stand, empty of all water. I called out for Rebecca. There was always hope, but it was met with silence. The carpet had been cleaned, and any remnants of my swimming friends were gone. Rebecca must have cleaned up. I squatted down and felt the carpeting. It was dry. There was a note on the kitchen counter. Carl saw it first and read it. His expression wasn't pleasant when he handed it to me. "Damon, I caused too much pain. I won't allow you to forgive me. I am untouchable. Rebecca." The pain I felt in my chest was nothing compared to the one in my heart. I could not control my tears and turned away from Carl. My angel was lost and hurting, and I wasn't there. This wasn't her doing, and if I had to cut through the entire mob to get to her, I would. "Screw the syndicate," Carl said. "We'll find her." I plan to. I hadn't slept well. There isn't such a thing as a comfortable position when you have a broken rib. The best I could do was lie flat on the floor covered with a few blankets. I paid for it in the morning. Standing up, my stiff body brought tears to my eyes. I let out a couple of good groans, attempting to expel the pain. If it came to a fight, I was finished. Screw it. Rebecca was worth it. I showered, letting the warm water wash over me. If I stood still in the falling rain, I could actually forget about the pain and think straight. I had to get to Tammy's apartment door without her knowing. Passing a guard at the front door seemed easy enough. I could just be patient and follow another resident. The guard was a more difficult problem. If he called Tammy, I would never be let in. I smiled when a plan formed. I finished and spent a painful few minutes drying off. I called my boss, who was sympathetic and allowed me to use more PTO, not like he really had a choice. The hospital gave me the cover I needed. I hung up and called back, this time connecting to Trudy, the one woman who seemed to really support Rebecca and me. I dumped everything on her. There was no point in asking for her help if she was uninformed. "You're crazy," Trudy said seriously. "I'll do it, but you better not end up dead." "Tammy Simpson at Gardenway Apartments on Grand," I said. "Yes, and thank you. I owe you big." "Lunch," Trudy said. "You pick the restaurant." With that settled, we said our goodbyes, and I spent the next 30 minutes getting dressed. Each piece of clothing cost me dearly. I dreaded the last pieces, socks. I was seriously thinking of just doing shoes, but life had to go on. I was determined the beating wouldn't change my life. I opened my sock drawer and found it empty. The drawer below it was also empty. The third drawer held my socks, all pairs balled together, neatly piled in rows according to color. Rebecca had moved my sock drawer. The ironic implications didn't escape me. She didn't want to leave. She had been taking over. I gritted my teeth, grabbed a pair of socks, sat on the bed, and donned them as best as I could with my wounds. I groaned through the pain, intent on forcing my body to acquiesce to my demands. I did the same with my shoes, simply ignoring the pain. It was painfully liberating. I looked back at the empty drawers. They should be filled with Rebecca's clothes. They would be holding baby blue underwear if it was the last thing I did. I stood with determination. It was time. "Mr. Richardson, to see Tammy Simpson," I said to the guard as I handed him my driver's license. I was wearing sunglasses to try to hide my black eyes. I didn't really care if they had a record of my visit. I only needed a few minutes with Tammy. "Miss Simpson called earlier," the guard said, handing me my ID. "Go right in." I smiled. Trudy had handled the impersonation beautifully. I would have made a good crook. I thanked him and parked next to the door, waiting. It took a few minutes before I could follow a tenant into the building. It was an older woman carrying groceries. Someone up there was looking out for me. The woman was grateful for my help as I assisted her with her bags. We had a small talk in the elevator, and she tried to get me to stay for lunch. I declined politely as I put her bags down in her kitchen. I don't think she ever realized I didn't belong in the building. My acting was getting good. She never even noticed the pain carrying her bags caused me. I knocked on Tammy's door, 2 floors down from the grocery lady. I heard shuffling behind the door as locks were opened. I purposely stood off to the side so the peephole could only view the side of my head. I don't think she even looked. Tammy's grin dropped quickly when she recognized me. "You can't be here," she said in a panic, trying to close the door. I shoved my foot in and winced when the edge cut into my gym shoe. It seemed it would be a fully painful day. She stopped pushing. "You have to leave." "Where is she?" I demanded in a level tone. I didn't want to rile the neighbors. Tammy tried to close the door again. This time, my anger rose. I pushed the door open, which forced her back. I stepped in and closed the door. Tammy closed the robe she was wearing. "Is she?" I asked again, a little louder. I wasn't leaving without the information. Tony Gordini entered the room from the bedroom hallway in a t-shirt, boxers, and black socks. Tammy gasped. I recognized him from pictures I saw on the internet. His gray hair was plastered in place, expensively shaped at some salon. His face was grim, and he had a hand behind his back. He moved toward me without any apprehension. I stood my ground, though running crossed my mind. He was a good 5 inches taller than me and had me by at least 50 pounds. "Who the hell are you?" Tony demanded as he stopped out of arm's reach. He didn't sound like he was used to being ignored. I had not planned for this. Tammy had stepped back out of the way, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes full of fear. I was screwed, so I went all in. "The guy you had beat up last week," I said, removing my glasses to expose my blackened eyes. A smile crossed Tony's face as he raised his hidden hand, pointing a gun at my head. "Can't take a hint," Tony stated calmly. I could tell he would have no problem pulling the trigger. I also sensed that he would enjoy it. I saw Tammy out of the corner of my eye. She mouthed, "I'm sorry." I turned my head toward her, ignoring the gun. I had seen lips move like that before, exactly like that. My mind took in her eyes, lips, and chin. Her weight hit it well, but the similarities were unmistakable. Her odd concern for Rebecca confirmed it. My mouth moved before my brain could stop it. "You're her mother," I spilled my revelation, my mouth hanging open in shock. Tammy's eyes went wide, and I saw the truth in them. She looked at Tony, and Tony looked between us both. Tammy's mouth tried to move, but nothing came out. She feared Tony more than I did. "Tammy?" Tony asked sharply. He wanted to know what the hell was going on. Tears were forming in Tammy's eyes. She tried to blubber an answer, but nothing intelligible was coming out. The gun shifted from me to Tammy. Tony didn't like not knowing what was going on. I could see he was a borderline megalomaniac. Tammy was sobbing, holding her hands in front of her face as if they would stop a bullet. This was nothing like I'd envisioned. My anger flared at the stupidity of it all. I shifted between Tony and Tammy. "Do you shoot everyone who pisses you off?" I asked, with more anger than I should have displayed. "And why the hell did you have your goons beat me up?" I added, since I was on a roll. Tony smiled and adjusted the gun until it pointed between my eyes. "I'll shoot you for breathing in my direction," Tony said. The gun was steady as a rock. He had no problem with shooting me. The beating was a warning you ignored. I don't like male hookers screwing my woman. I tilted my head and laughed. Tony grimaced. He wasn't used to being laughed at. "I love her daughter," I said to Tony, as if he were an idiot. "Why the hell would you think I wanted Tammy?" Tony ignored my question and oddly pointed the gun over my shoulder at Tammy. "What daughter?" Tony demanded. I shifted again to keep the gun pointed at me. Tammy was bawling. Tony was taking the idea of a daughter as an insult. I was screwing this up rather well. Tony put the gun at my belly. "I'll shoot you both if you don't get out of my way." I didn't move. He would shoot us both anyway. "Put the gun down," I ordered. I began to reach for the gun, figuring he would have pulled the trigger if he had really wanted to. His left hand moved faster than I expected and wrapped around my throat. He turned my body and slammed me up against the wall, my chest exploding in pain as my ribs shifted. The gun moved to my head. "Screw you," he said. I had pushed too hard. I could see his finger tightening on the trigger. "Your daughter!" Tammy screamed. I felt Tony's hand loosen on my neck. His expression changed to one of confusion. I started breathing again. We both turned to Tammy, her mascara running down her cheeks. "Your daughter," she repeated softly. Tony let go of me, and the gun dropped to his side. "Why did you pay him $3,000? Tony asked, pointing the gun at me as if it were a finger. "He bailed your daughter out of jail," Tammy answered, her own anger rising now that the truth was out. "I was paying him back." Tony looked at me, then took a step back and laid the gun on the counter. "How?" Tony asked, looking at Tammy. "When you did the 2 years for the bribery charge," Tammy sighed. "She was an accident. I tried to have her raised in secret. I just couldn't stay out of it." Why would you hide this from me?" Tony was getting angry again. The man was on a bipolar roller coaster. I stepped forward to intervene if he decided to get physical again. I was already accustomed to being a punching bag. Tammy just pointed at the gun. I didn't want her around this crap. Not to mention your wife finding out. She barely tolerates me as it is, Tammy added. His wife knew about them. I withheld an inappropriate smile. Tony cooled. I could almost see his brain working. He turned his back to us and walked to the couch, sitting down. I looked at the gun he had left on the counter. Tammy saw my eyes and shook her head. She wiped her eyes, smearing her makeup some more, and took me by the hand, leading me to the sitting area. We sat with the Godfather and watched him think. Tony looked up at me, his expression calm. "I have acted rashly," he said, then turned to Tammy. "I guess that was my apology. I wasn't going to demand more." "Tell me about her," he said, his tone thoughtful. Tammy smiled. She looked a little ridiculous with her smeared makeup, but I could see Rebecca in the smile. "You met her?" "Rebecca. She was the one staying with me a few weeks ago." "Does she know?" Tony asked. "No," Tammy said quickly. "And she can never know. She has her own problems, and I don't want her to have ours." "She's a pretty girl," Tony said, almost talking to himself. Tammy spent a good part of the morning telling Tony about Rebecca. In the middle of it, Tony went to the bathroom and returned with a washcloth, gently wiping the makeup off Tammy's face. I found it odd that one moment he points a gun at her, and the next he is gently caring for her. Tammy seemed very happy with his care. I found out that Kathy was a childhood friend of Tammy's. They had cooked up Rebecca's history between them, forged documents, and after a few years, no one questioned it. Tammy had been supporting Kathy while she cared for Rebecca. No wonder Kathy wanted Rebecca to move back in with her. Rebecca was her gold mine. I tried several times to interject my need to find Rebecca, but was stalled by a stern look. There was a process to the conversation, and Tony defined what that was. I sat back, trying to remain comfortable while not moving my torso. By 10, I had a scotch in my hand. Tony had decided alcohol was a good idea, and he didn't drink alone. It was hard going down, but the warmth seemed to dull the pain in my torso, especially the sharp pain in my side. "What do you do?" Tony asked. He lifted his half-empty glass and pointed to me. It wasn't small talk, he demanded to know. "I'm a database administrator for an insurance company," I replied, not wanting to tell him which insurance company. I really didn't want to see him or his people ever again. "Does it pay well?" I was being interviewed. Tony had only known he was a father for a couple of hours. "I won't starve," I answered cryptically. I took another sip of the scotch and let it burn the back of my throat. Tony's expression was difficult to read. I wasn't sure if my answers were angering him or if I could beat him in a race to the gun if needed. "Why did you come here this morning?" Tony asked. "People usually don't ignore my warnings. Rebecca left me and won't answer my calls." "She blames herself for your rashness," I said, though I was going to use a different term but thought better of it. "I thought Tammy might know where she is. I intend to get her back." Tony nodded and looked at Tammy. "Do you know where she is?" he asked. "Kathy told me Rebecca won't speak to me anymore," Tammy said. I could see her eyes watering again. She knew I was involved in what happened. Tammy looked toward me. "She loves you and hates herself for what happened." Tony moved quickly to Tammy's side and put his arm around her. Tammy leaned into him and cried. "We fixed this," Tony said, almost sweetly. I had trouble wrapping my head around a born killer being violent one minute and calm and caring the next. I wanted out of this freak show. I just wanted Rebecca back. "Where is she?" I interjected. "Corey's Steakhouse," Tammy blubbered off Wilkerson Road. "She's working the day shift." I knew the place, a large restaurant serving family fare. I got up, eager to leave. Tony stood with me. It wasn't going to be a clean exit. He waved me over to the counter where he wrote a phone number on a piece of paper. "If anything happens that you can't handle," Tony said, handing me the paper, "call this number and tell them who you are." He put his hand on my shoulder as if we were old friends. I didn't like it, but I didn't dare move it off. Find a way to fix things between Tammy and Rebecca. I'll stay out of it, but know that she's my blood. I will not hesitate if I feel she has been wronged. I guess that's what passes for family bonding in the mob, a threat, a demand, and a magic number that solves problems. I stuffed the number into my pocket. "Good," Tony said, smiling at my obvious agreement. He held out his hand like some kind of trophy. I shook it firmly, trying not to appear as weak as I felt. He moved to the door and opened it for me. I sensed he didn't do that often, another form of apology, I suspected. "Take care of her," Tammy pleaded as I began walking out. "I intend to," I told her. Mountains of stress flowed away when the door closed behind me. This was not the visit I had intended at all. Corey's steakhouse was huge. It had a pitched green roof that looked almost homey, held up by faux pillars with a big front porch lined with benches for the evening rush. It was more trough than fine dining, decent food served quickly in an eat-and-get-out fashion. They churned customers as quickly as possible. It wasn't the gourmet atmosphere I envisioned when I thought of Rebecca's cooking. I stepped inside and was welcomed by no fewer than 3 high school-aged greeters. The place was packed, and the tables ran deep into the building. A central bar and many wooden partitions only allowed you to see a handful of tables at a time. "How many in your party, sir?" a young man with an acne problem asked. "Actually, I'm looking for a waitress named Rebecca Morrison," I responded politely. "There's no visiting during working hours," the boy replied quickly. I smiled, not really concerned with the rules. "Are you going to make me walk around looking for her?" I asked pleasantly. A mother with a family waiting for a table off to the side gave me a dirty look. I smiled at her as well. "I can get a manager if you wish," the boy said, obviously practiced with people who wished to bend the rules. A loud crash of dishes echoed from the left side of the restaurant, beyond my viewing range. It went on for a couple of seconds before it settled. There was a smattering of applause followed by a loud, "You witch." I didn't hesitate and moved quickly. I knew there could only be one person in the middle of the disaster. "These are new pants," an older man yelled. "You're going to pay for this." His face was red with anger, and there was some kind of burgundy sauce running down the left leg of his khaki pants. His wife was trying desperately to pull him back to his seat. Everyone at the surrounding tables was watching the scene. That's where I found her. Rebecca was on her knees, her back to me. She was trying hard to pull plates and cups back to the tray she had spilled. I could see her shoulders shaking and knew she was holding back tears. "I'm so sorry," she choked out, trying to wipe his pants with a rag. "Don't touch me, you incompetent," the man started, then stalled when he saw me coming fast. I had removed my glasses, and my bruised eyes were on his. All the anger from the past week was boiling under my skin. "Put your bum down," I said loudly. The man did, and he would never know how intelligent that move was. I pulled out my business card and handed it to his wife. "Send me the bill," I said. The man started to open his mouth. "It was an accident." "Leave it at that," I added firmly. He did. Rebecca was shaking, and I could hear her choking back a full cry. She had heard me but wasn't turning around. I knelt down next to her and started helping her fill the tray. Our hands met over a cup, and the dam burst. The tears flowed. I wrapped her in my arms, ignoring the pain from my broken rib, and whispered in her ear, "Don't ever leave me again. I am less without your touch." She cried and nodded, squeezing me until I saw stars. "I love you," I added, more tears flowing. I helped her to her feet, straining not to look as weak as I was. A manager arrived, eyes wide at the mess around our feet. He looked at Rebecca's bloodshot eyes and whispered something into the microphone attached to his headset. "Rebecca," he said calmly while looking at me, "take this gentleman to the back. I have a team coming to clean this up." He moved to the irate man with the burgundy stain and began trying to retain his patronage. I liked the manager, efficient, if nothing else. Rebecca led me back through the kitchen to an employee break room. She had been wiping her eyes along the way. When we arrived, she turned, and her lips caressed mine. The soft kiss quickly warmed to a forceful desire. Her hands circled my head, and she pulled me closer. She was mine again. That kiss was worth every ounce of pain it caused in my chest. "Look what I did to you," Rebecca said when she pulled her face away. There was sadness in her eyes. I hated that sadness. She brushed her hand lightly across my cheek, trying to wipe the bruising away. "I know a secret," I said quietly. "I want to give it to you, but you must not act rashly with it. You will want to, but you can't." I wiped my thumbs across Rebecca's cheeks, taking the remnants of her tears with them. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and confusion. "I'm afraid I will lose you if you find out another way," she said. "Tell me," Rebecca said, her eyes holding love. So I did. I told her everything I had found out that morning. I didn't care how Tammy or Tony felt about Rebecca knowing. Secrets could only hurt us now. When I was done, I stared fearfully into her eyes. "You will never lose me again," Rebecca said softly, ignoring the knowledge of her former parents. The kiss was more passionate, more us. I lingered in it, wanting time to stop. The world made sense again. The manager entered, and we separated. He looked at both of us with a half-smile. "Your shift is covered," he said to Rebecca. "Take the day and decide if this job is right for you." "It isn't," I answered for Rebecca. Rebecca looked at me and nodded in agreement. She was a chef, not a waitress. The manager smiled, saving himself the trouble of considering firing someone. "I hope this doesn't mean you won't enjoy a meal with us once in a while," the manager said, in full sales mode. This guy was underemployed, a problem solver who never loses sight of the goal line. "Of course not, Frank," I said, looking at his name tag. I extended my hand, and he shook it. "It makes sense," Rebecca commented as we drove away from the restaurant. "A lot of things make sense now." I had to agree. "I'm still not talking to her," she continued, "not after what she caused." Rebecca reached over and stroked my bruised face. "I can't believe he thought you were a gigolo. Am I not hot enough?" I joked. "You could make a good living," Rebecca answered judiciously, a sly smile gracing her face. She turned away to look out the window. "I am afraid, though," she admitted slowly, "of us, of the future." Rebecca said, "Look what's happened to you. It hasn't even been 2 weeks." I looked toward her, then back to the road. No tears, no sadness, just thoughtfulness. "You're assuming the past dictates the future," I philosophized. "I say the worst has been done. It will be smooth sailing from here on out." I looked over quickly and saw that Rebecca didn't share my optimism. "I don't regret any of it," I added, then chuckled. "I could have skipped the beating, but it was a minor cost for knowing you. What if it gets worse? What if it gets better?" Rebecca dueled. She smiled. "How sore are you?" Rebecca asked. I looked over at her, a very provocative smile on my face. There was a sparkle in her eyes that I could feel between my legs. "Not that sore," I lied, with a broad smile. "Good," Rebecca said, her hand moving to my leg. I returned my eyes to the road as her hand climbed up my thigh. "I'm told makeup sex is pretty good." I decided the speed limit no longer applied to me. I waited at the altar, or what masqueraded as one, in the small Las Vegas chapel. The past few months had been the best of my life. I hadn't been beaten up for a while, so I decided to propose during the lull. I wasn't even halfway through the question when Rebecca said yes. I think she feared something might happen before the end of the question. Rebecca was enrolled in a culinary school and was on a new level of happiness, which put me one step higher, somewhere around ecstatic. Rebecca eventually made up with Tammy, but never acknowledged Tammy as her mother. It was Rebecca's secret now, and it would die with me if she wished it. Carl was looking a little worse for wear next to me. he was experiencing stripper detox. As promised, he threw me a bachelor party that involved 3 strip clubs and ended around 4 in the morning. It was the first time in my life that random naked women held little interest. Carl made up for my failings. I had a lot of fun watching him fall in love about 10 times. "You ready?" Kathy called from the entryway. Kathy had remained Rebecca's sister. Rebecca preferred it that way. Kathy was the only family she had known, and acknowledging the truth would ruin that. Kathy had taken care of Rebecca growing up, and Rebecca thought of her more as a sister than some real sisters. Since I had proposed, Kathy had given up her protectiveness and embraced me as a brother. At least we would have someone for the holidays. I nodded to Kathy and straightened up. Kathy signaled the old lady at the piano, and "Here Comes the Bride" started. I expected to see Rebecca around the corner in the white dress she and Kathy had picked out. It wasn't a full wedding dress, but I was sure it would be beautiful on her. Carl and I were slightly informal ourselves, in black suits, white shirts, and blue ties, instead of tuxes. It didn't make sense to go the whole 9 yards when we were practically eloping. Kathy's eyes went wide, and she flung her hands out in front of her in the direction Rebecca was coming. I heard something breakable hit the ground, followed quickly by other non-breakable things. "Oh, honey," Kathy said sorrowfully, moving quickly off to the side out of my vision. I started moving toward the entryway, hoping it wasn't what I feared it was. Rebecca came around the corner, Kathy helping her along. Half her hair was undone, the rest still in the bun she had spent so much time creating. The bouquet of flowers was mostly broken, and her white dress had something dark splattered across the front. The piano player stopped, and the justice of the peace coughed uncomfortably. Rebecca was on the verge of tears. I didn't know how to undo it. "Damon!" Carl called. I turned. Carl had a pot of flowers he had grabbed off the altar. He held them out to me, his silly smile all the instruction I needed. I undid the button on my suit jacket, pulled the pink carnations out of the pot, and dumped the contents, a greenish, fertilized water mixture, down the front of my white shirt. I handed the pot back to Carl and marched the flowers to Rebecca. "Sorry," I said softly. "I had an accident back there." I took the broken bouquet out of Rebecca's hands and replaced it with the carnations, whose stems were entirely too long. A tear formed in her eye that bide the smile on her lips. "I love you, you know," Rebecca said. I tossed the ruined flowers onto the floor and offered my elbow. She put her arm through it, and I nodded to the lady at the piano. The music started again, and I walked my bride to the justice of the peace, who had seen everything. Rebecca was shaking when the 5th meter registered the same as the others. Panic coursed through her as she looked at them arrayed along the counter. They all agreed the 6 seemed insane, but she thought she should run to the store again anyway. Rebecca heard the garage door going up and bit her lower lip. Damon was home early. She quickly swept the meters into the kitchen drawer. She opened the refrigerator and pulled out the balsamic marinated chicken she had prepared for dinner. If she looked busy, maybe he wouldn't know something was wrong. She had no way of knowing how he would react. She didn't want to lose him over this. "Got off early," Damon said happily, hanging his jacket in the closet. "That's nice," Rebecca stuttered, realized it, and added, "I'm glad you're home." Damon sensed Rebecca was harried, but he let it go. "What's for dinner?" he asked. "Chicken," Rebecca answered, starting to transfer the chicken breasts to a cooking tray. "What's wrong?" Damon asked, suspicious of her one-word answer. "What do you mean?" Rebecca replied as she set the oven temperature. "You never make just chicken, love," Damon continued. "It always has a name. I need an explanation." He moved closer and wrapped his arms around Rebecca from behind. She leaned back and pecked his cheek, then returned to moving the tray of chicken to the oven. Damon released her, a little surprised, wondering where his welcome home kiss was. "Did I do something wrong?" Damon asked, taking a step back. Rebecca caught the edge of the pan on the side of the oven, lost her grip, and it all tumbled to the floor. Frustration forced her hand. She turned to Damon with tears she couldn't hold back. "There's been another accident," Rebecca sobbed, falling into Damon's arms. He knew she didn't mean the chicken. "Tell me," Damon whispered, holding her as she found the courage. "You promise not to be angry?" Rebecca pleaded. Damon promised, so she slowly pulled open the drawer. It took a moment before Damon figured out what he was looking at. He lifted up one of the digital meters. It clearly displayed the word pregnant. He pulled out another with the same results. He smiled, knowing the others would be the same. "You will make a wonderful mother," Damon said, pulling Rebecca back into his arms. "You're not upset?" Rebecca asked. Damon answered with his lips, a long, "Welcome home, welcome parenthood, welcome to life" kiss. Rebecca melted into him. It was only an accident, after all. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.